So following the previous video, in today's one, we are going to see how to find your protected version because knowing the mechanism changes nothing. Finding yours specifically does. So the protected version is designed to stay hidden from the person carrying it. So this document and this video is a diagnostic. By the end of it, you should be able to name yours specifically, the domain it lives in, what it claims about you, and the exact action that would test it. So why it stays hidden? So the orbit hides its own center. So after the first video and document, most people will recognize the mechanism in themselves immediately. The orbit, the protected version, the action that keeps getting deferred, it lands close, and that recognition feels like progress. Then they try to locate their specific protected version, and the precision isn't there. Because recognition of a mechanism and identification of your particular version are two different things. The first can happen in a moment. The second rarely comes from the same kind of reflection that produced the first, because the protected version is designed to stay just below the level where honest self-examination normally goes. So from inside the orbit, the protected version looks like ambition. It looks like high standards. It looks like being selective about the right moment. It looks like wisdom. The diagnostic exists because those disguises hold up well under the ordinary introspection exercises. This is why the diagnostic uses indirect approaches. Asking what is your protected version rarely works. The orbit reframes the question before it lands. So the four signals below this reach it from angles the protection response doesn't cover. So what it looks like in practice. So 5 shapes that the same trap takes. So the protected version takes different forms depending on the domain. The mechanism is identical across all of them. What changes is the specific claim being protected and the specific action being avoided. So, for example, in terms of business, maybe the protected version claim could be my idea could actually work if the conditions were right. So what is the orbit behavior around that? It refines the idea, it researches markets, it delays the launch. The claim always contains the word could. The orbit behavior is always something that keeps the claim plausible without testing it. The domain varies, but the structure is fixed. So basically, the pattern to notice here is that the protected version tends to live in the domain you care about the most. The stakes of being wrong there are the highest, which makes the protection response the strongest. The area where you are most stuck is rarely arbitrary. So then where do we look when looking directly doesn't work? So these 3 signals point to the protected version indirectly. Each one works because the protection response doesn't defend against it directly. They approach from angles outside the orbit's field of awareness. So first of all, we have the signal number 1, which is defensiveness. So the protected version generates a strong defensive reaction when questioned, because questioning it feels identical to threatening it. Notice where you become unexpectedly sharp, dismissive, or closed when someone raises a doubt. The sharpness is the signal, and the topic it attaches to is the address. So here is a useful test. Find a belief about your own potential that you would rather not examine too closely. The reluctance to examine it is proportional to how much the protected version depends on it staying intact. Signal number 2 is the almost ready. So almost ready is the orbit's most comfortable position because it's close enough to feel like progress but far enough to avoid the test. So find the thing you have been almost ready to do for the longest time, 6 months, a year, several years, and the duration of the almost ready tracks the value of the protected version. So the longer something has stayed at almost ready, the more the protected version depends on it staying there. And then we have signal number 3, which is embarrassment asymmetry. This is basically that in domains where the protected version lives, the emotional math runs asymmetric. So a good outcome produces mild satisfaction, and a poor outcome produces something closer to devastation. The ratio is just wrong. Where you find that asymmetry, where failure would hit harder than success would lift, the protected version is nearby. It's the version of you whose credibility is on the line in the result. So the diagnostic starts with 4 questions, and you need to sit with each one. So these questions work through the indirect angles, the 3 signals identified. So pay attention to each one and read them slowly if you are watching this. The first answer that comes is usually the orbit's answer. The second or third answer, specifically if it's accompanied by some discomfort, it's closer to the truth. So, what do you know you are capable of that you haven't yet demonstrated to the world? The protected version lives in this gap. What you know about yourself privately that the world hasn't seen evidence of yet. Name it as specifically as possible. The second question is, what project or action, if it failed publicly, would change how you think about yourself? The answer points to the claim the protected version is making. A failure that would merely be disappointing is ordinary, but a failure that would change your self-concept is a test of the protected version. So, the next question is, what are you preserving by not starting? So, reframe the procrastination as a choice with a benefit. Something is being preserved. What is it? Specifically, the orbit always has a payoff, and finding it names what's being protected. And the fourth question is, what have you described yourself as working toward for more than 6 months without meaningful movement? The almost ready state has a specific object, and you need to name it, and then ask, if you knew for certain it wouldn't work, would you still want to try it? The answer to that question separates what you actually want from what you need to believe you want. And the discomfort you feel reading and listening to these questions is a more reliable signal than the answer you give to it. So what is the anatomy of this? So we need to name yours with precision. So a vague protected version is still a protected version. But the identity move, the work that actually breaks the orbit, requires precision. You need to be able to state yours in a form specific enough to identify the exact action that would test it. Every protected version has 3 components. The first component, as we saw, is the domain. So the area of life or work where the protected version lives. It can be writing, it can be business, it can be creative output, relationships, intellectual life. Usually the domain you care about the most and produce the least in. The second component is the claim, what the protected version asserts about your capabilities in that domain. Always a could, always conditional, usually being held for years without resolution. And the component number 3 is the test, the specific action that would produce data about the claim, one action concrete enough to be scheduled. The orbit maintains itself by keeping this action perpetually future. So write it out and complete this sentence. In the domain of X, I believe I could claim the action that would test this is a specific test. If the test feels uncomfortable to write down, the protected version is in range. So what comes next after this? So naming it is just the first step. The work starts after. So finding the protected version doesn't dissolve it. Most people, when they identify it clearly, feel a brief clarity followed by renewed avoidance. The orbit reasserts itself because the protection response is physiological, running beneath cognitive understanding. But precision changes what's possible. A vague sense that you are stuck somewhere doesn't give you anywhere to work. A specific protected version, named by domain, claim, and test, gives you an exact address. The identity move requires knowing specifically what you are releasing. A general letting go of who I might be produces nothing. Releasing the specific claim in the specific domain produces traction. The test is the unit of work. Everything else in the framework is preparation for taking the specific action you identified is component 3. The discomfort of having named it precisely is accurate information. It confirms the protected version was real and that the test is the right one. The next document covers the identity move, what releasing the protected version actually requires, why it feels like loss even when it's the right move, and what changes on the other side of it. So, thank you again for watching and see you next video.